What are cryptocurrencies?
Hey, hey, hey.
What are NFTs?
A non-fungible token.
Time to buy Bitcoin.
Bitcoin just seems like a scam.
What's up, Bitcoin?
So, Tony, first of all, thank you. Thank you for all of this, for being here and for doing this together. So we've just launched Ledger Stax, finally.
Yeah, we launched it and we launched it together, and it's crazy that it all came together. Like the whole story, the whole background, like how it happened, all the ups and downs along the way. Like it's pretty cool story, and we got to do it together. That's like so much fun in a city we love.
Yeah, I think I keep telling people, like, they're like, wait, how did this happen? And this is a pretty personal story for me that starts with this sentence: well, 7 years ago, I moved to Paris and I didn't make very many friends, but two of the friends I made were Tony Fadell and Pascal. And now there's Ledger Stax. Okay, so let's try to go backwards and put this story together. So you and I both moved to Paris 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Why did you come here?
I came to Paris, well, first started coming in 2009. So 2009, I was only supposed to be visiting for 2 weeks, and it ended up being 8-9 months because I loved it so much. And, the kids were loving it. So we're just like, let's stay for a while.
And were you trying out other places in the world at the time?
Yeah, I was on a worldwide trip. So about a year and a half worldwide trip, trying different places in Spain, doing stuff in the States, just all around, just to try to absorb and get out of Silicon Valley after 10 years of doing, iPod, iPhone, all that stuff. It was like, okay, gotta right the brain, because it was a trend bill that was never ending until I said, stop this madness.
And so you came really to escape. And when you got here, did your brain stop working?
Well, when it came to Paris specifically, I had so much inspiration. Well, one, I got to meet a few really, really smart people here. That was great, because I was like, I got reconnected with kind of Silicon Valley, but who are those Silicon Valley type people here? That was one thing. And then the second one was really, I got the inspiration to really design Nest and the business plan. So the time that I was here, I was doing that kind of work, and then went back to Silicon Valley to actually build Nest. And then at the end of Nest, came back to Paris, and that's, and now it leads me to Stax.
So Paris inspired Nest.
Paris absolutely inspired Nest, and it absolutely inspired, to come back, and then ultimately Stax.
And then what, I'm curious, like, what your first impressions, like, you kind of eject yourself out of Silicon Valley and you come to Paris, but like you said, you meet these intelligent people in Paris. What were your first impressions of the way it was different here than compared to Silicon Valley?
Well, in 2009, it was a very different place than it was in 2016, when you show up. So 2009, it was like, there's some smart people here, but it was still like, oh, well, why don't we have the French version of Google? And why don't we have the French version or the European version of Facebook or whatever it was? So it was a lot of this kind of hemming and hawing, still big companies. There were a few people doing a few things interesting, and they were smart, of course, but it wasn't an entrepreneurial culture yet. Like when I came back in 2016 and in 2017, the whole shift in Paris and in France and a lot of places in Europe went from corporations to, because of, I think, the app economy, right? iPhone created this, you could create a lot of small companies around apps on a smartphone platform. And all of a sudden, all of this entrepreneurialism was happening in those 8 years, from the first time I was first here to the time it moved here.
Right.
And that's what was so exciting, because I was like, there's smart people. Now it's entrepreneurial. And I was like, in 2016, 17, I go, this feels like Silicon Valley when I got there in 1991, 1990. Yeah. I was like, oh my God, I felt this energy. I wanted to be here.
I had a really similar feeling, like when I moved to Los Angeles in 1995, and there was, what everyone said to me was, why didn't you move to San Francisco, right? But over the 20 years I was in LA, there was a startup economy certainly got built, and that startup was everything. It really started in a lot of ways with MySpace, but it went on through so many other companies, and then it also became, kind of Netflix startup culture, and it became cannabis startup culture, and kind of like, everything was possible in California, but also in Los Angeles. And then when I got here in 2015, 2016, I had the same feeling. It was like, oh, I know this feeling. This feels like LA in kind of 2002 even was sort of what I was feeling. So I know exactly what you meant. Okay. So,
and then also when I got here in 2016, people are like, why are you coming here? Everyone's going where you're leaving. And I'm like, why are you coming to Paris? I get this all the time, even lesser extent now, but I still get it. Why? You were in the heart of everything. Why'd you inject yourself?
I had exactly the same thing. Everyone was like, wait, you moved from California to Paris? Like, we're all trying to go there. Why are you coming here? And I was like, no, you don't understand. That's done.
Yeah. That's the past. I love the place. I love the people. Love it. But where's the new stuff? I was there 26 years already at that point. It was like, okay, ça suffit. Enough, man.
Where is the frontier?
Yeah, where's the cutting edge?
That's
the tip of the spear.
Exactly what I felt. Okay, so you were here. Nest was conceived here. You went back to California to build Nest,
right?
As a company, you do. Nest sells to Google. You leave ultimately, and
show up in Paris and just said, okay, what am I going to do? Right. And I had started investing in things of that nature in companies all around. And it was just literally, let's see what happens. Let's just let see what blows in the wind. And I started being able to hire people from my old teams, and start creating this what we call Mentors with Money company, where we would go and invest in companies and help them with their story, help them with their design of their products, help them with their experiences, their operations, funding, all that stuff. So we were directly investing, and now it's called Build Collective, and we have over 200 companies that we've directly invested in, and we help all around the world. In France, in Europe, and in many, many continents.
So 2016 to today, from Paris, Build Collective, 200 plus companies, and a book.
And a book this past year in May, came out with Build. And the book has just it's been insane. It was a labor of love, took 2 years. It started it right at the beginning of COVID. I didn't know COVID was coming, but hey, and it was a perfect time to write this book. And it really allowed me to encapsulate all the stuff I did those 26 years in Silicon Valley in this book, and really get out there to honor my mentors who had helped me in the times when I was in Silicon Valley to get to where I was going. And before that, my grandfather, everyone who helped me to get to where I am today. And so that Build was a great segue into literally, while I was doing it, working on Stax with you guys, because it just it crystallized so many ways of how we were able to build what we were able to build at Apple or at Nest or even before that, and what were those lessons learned. So they were fresh in my mind. So using Stax and Ledger, it was like, okay, what are we going to do? And let's not make those same mistakes. So it was really, timing was perfect.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of nice to be like, to have done this before, have it not be your first rodeo, and like we all benefit from all of this experience. So, all right, I'm gonna divert and tell a bit of my personal story now, because it plays into this. So 2015, we had launched Apple Music, and I get a call from a company called LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, based here in Paris. They're looking for a chief digital officer. I give them some recommendations because I don't think I'm their guy. But having, spent some time with Ben Arnault, Alex Arnault, Nicolas Brunel, and other people, like just kind of like going down the rabbit hole, as it were, with them. Who are these guys? What are they trying to do? You and I, once upon a time, came from a world where music was 0% digital, and now it's close to 100% digital. And here I was staring at LVMH, which was 3% digital, and saying, I think I could make it something more than 3%.
Yeah, a little bit.
So I said yes, and I come here. Now, as soon as I come here, people start saying to me, oh, then you must know Tony Fadell. I'm like, no, I know who he is, but no, I never met the guy. I mean, well, you both, Tony invented the iPod, and you built
digital music.
You built Apple Music. You must know each other. Like, oh, everywhere I would go, oh, hey, welcome to Paris, and do you know Tony Fadell? I'm like, I don't know Tony Fadell. So finally, our mutual friend Bradley Horowitz says,
good old Bradley,
hey, you're moving to Paris. Do you know Tony Fadell? I'm like, I don't know Tony Fadell. And he's like, oh, do you want to meet him? Yes. Thank you. So it turns out you and I are taking our kids to school on the first day of school.
Very first day.
Same age, same class. And then I feel like we've been friends ever since.
Ever since. Literally, we were always together ever since that September or August in 2017, I think.
No,
16,
that would have been because we
2016.
started mid-year, so it was January
Yes.
of 2016. And so, yes, so that's my personal story. Now, similarly, right around the same time, I'm moving here to Paris, and a former colleague, Toby Koppel, who I'd worked with at Yahoo, and Pascal worked with at Yahoo, said, "Oh, you're coming to Paris. You've got to meet Pascal Gauthier." And in the first 10 minutes I met Pascal, it was in a group of people, and we didn't have a lot of time. It was one of these like, "Hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you." And I just like, something twisted in my brain. I was like, this guy is not like all of the other people I've met since I moved here. And I was like, can I see you again? You know, it was almost like I just wanted a second date. I really,
I know that feeling. Yeah.
And so Pascal had opened a restaurant here recently, and he's like, "Oh, well, come."
And he wasn't CEO of Ledger yet.
No,
he was an investor, but he was an investor. The CEO.
He was an EIR basically at the time. And so, we got talking. Our families became friends. We both love to ski, and we've spent a lot of time together. So really, I think this is why it's so personal for me. I've made like 4 friends here. Since I moved to
You've been
Paris.
very busy while you've been here.
And you and Pascal are 50% of that puzzle, and you know the other half very well. And so the fact that like we've managed to do something together is, I mean, in some ways surprising, right? Sometimes you want to keep these things separately.
Yeah, you're like, I separate, business from pleasure. Like, I don't want to screw it up with my friends. These are my friends. Like, okay, we all have our personalities and our idiosyncrasies.
So then 2020, I don't think either of us, we saw each other as families.
Yes.
But we really didn't see anyone else.
Yeah, we were quarantined. We were our little pod.
And you and I also sort of looked at each other with like wild eyes, looking at crypto and went, this is it, isn't it? $2 trillion of stimulus in the US, $1 trillion in Europe. The technology's here.
Yeah, it's been vetted. It's been 7 years, so to speak, at that point.
And we said, I think that, I think this happens, right? That was, now I'd been talking to Pascal about Ledger for years at that point. And the great thing for me is I got to ask all the dumb questions, why hardware, why Ledger, why not my phone? I got to, ask all those dumb questions and, meet, people like Nicolas Baca, Charles Guillemet, and like really kind of go, okay, wow. These people are, they understand what is happening here. And this reminds me of the early days of the internet when there are hyper intelligent people who are completely bought in on something where, I need more knowledge, right? So that was
time to learn.
That was, yeah, exactly. Time to learn. And so, I finally, summer of 2020, I said to Pascal, I'm in. Like, how do we do this, right? So I take the role. Pascal, I think presciently gives me the title of Chief Experience Officer because, his way of looking at it is, we need to build an experience in the way that when you buy an Apple phone, you're not buying a piece of hardware, you're buying an experience, you're buying an ecosystem, and Ledger needs to build that experience in that ecosystem. So let's go further on that. And you, Tony, basically said to me, I'm not letting you go there unless I do the diligence.
Exactly. I was like, Ian, wait, slow up. This crypto stuff, especially security, there's a real problem here. And this is hardware-based stuff. I know a little bit about hardware. And I wanted to learn as well. Let's go see if these guys are real.
So you're like, I want to. So you basically said, I'm going to go do the diligence on your new job.
Exactly. I was like, I got to learn more. You're there. Okay, let's go figure out if this thing is real.
And then Tony comes back and he's like, basically gives me the green light. I
got to meet with Charles. I got to walk through the hardware. I got to understand everything really in detail and put a lot of hard questions out. And then I was like looking at all the competitors at the same time going, oh, wait a second, these guys are different.
And what did you make of, because you came in and spent time with the technology. Like what did you make of the technology when you were sort of thinking of it in, diligence and competitive landscape?
Well, you first start with what is that robust what is that robust piece of hardware that has been tried and tested and really when you understand that the ledger technology comes from the chip and pin world, from the credit card world, and you see that chip and pin and you know the vectors of hacking on that and how many years, and everybody's trying to get at that, and you know it's coming from that, you know you're starting with a fundamental base, and then you start to understand all the layers. So one is the chip technology, or those IP blocks inside the chip, then the stuff around those IP blocks, then the hardware and the secure screen, the secure IO, and understanding how all of this stuff works. You start to see that this isn't just another open sourced like Linux that has been tried to be hardened. You know, I've seen, especially in iPod days, and then definitely in iPhone days, all the hacking vectors that you could have. You're like, oh my God, it's so hard to plug all these holes if you don't think first principles of how you design. You're always going to be patching, and the layers and how you build your APIs and everything. Whereas this was built from the ground up, starting with that ultra secure hardware element. And then every single layer has been thoughtfully designed to make sure that security is not compromised in any way and tested all the way. Very, very different thing when people write a bunch of software. Oh, and then there's some security team over here. This is a secure set of software engineers. In other words, that they're security minded when they're building it.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very different take.
Yeah.
And that's what impressed me, especially when I looked at all the other and they were underfunded. They hadn't been in the market. They were hacked, or they started with some hardware that hadn't been tested in the market.
Right, and there is something actually to come back to the Paris thematic. You know, there is a métier here in France. I mean, there's something, you know, in the water, or more likely, you know, the right set of professors, you know, down in Grenoble, where, you know, many people on the team come from. Like, this is
most advanced math, complex math was all done here in France. It's in the universities. It's like a big deal for people to graduate with mathematics degrees or something related to it. It's special.
No, there really is a you know, and it's hard to find a crypto team anywhere in the world that doesn't have a French person on it. You know, it's like there's definitely, you know, a real craft here in this country. Well, so you know, okay, so
and then I didn't even talk about the dungeon. Yeah, the dungeon, like literally going out and hacking Ledger, trying to hack Ledger devices, hacking third-party devices, whether that's hardware or software. And it wasn't just okay, we're going to do a great job from a white hat perspective, but also from a black hat perspective, and the amount of testing reminds you of like what we would do to test like how well the cell phone works or the camera works, or like it's, you know, there are better security teams, but this is like to another level. This is orders of magnitude better than I've seen in most huge companies, whether that was Google or Apple or otherwise.
No, I appreciate that. I think it's, and I love it. We're working with this team. I usually say this, but I always feel like I'm sort of like a mouthpiece for this team that does this. And I think we'll come to it in a second, but you know, we're putting worlds together here, right? Like the world that I come from and where you come from is different. And the world that the security team comes from here is also different.
So
and
they did a great job
together.
of convincing me that you took you went to a great company. So I was like, okay, I'm convinced on the basics,
right? But
the fundamentals.
But then Tony comes back, as Tony does, and you know, tells me and Pascal that our baby is ugly. Basically, which, you know, always hurts.
Well, let's be clear. Like, look, the world of crypto when Ledger started was, you know, 7 years ago. And that world was very much like the MP3 world of like 1998, 1999 that I knew of, that I was growing up in learning about MP3s and digital music, right? So you make a set of devices because you're like, that's what those users need, because you don't know if it's going to be consumer.
So what Tony said is, I said, yeah, Tony, my new job is I'm going to run the consumer business at Ledger. And Tony says, Ian, there is no consumer business in crypto. It's B2G, business to geek, not business to consumer. Your job is to make it B2C.
Exactly.
And then you said, okay, look, and also there's a hole in your product roadmap.
Yeah, there was a hole in it. So when I looked at it, and you guys were talking about some futuristic devices as well as the ones you were shipping, and I was like, I'm like looking at it, I'm like, wait a second. You go from this to this other B2G product. So it was like, oh, we're going to go from B to G to B to G. I'm like, no. Where's the C part? Where's the user experience? Where's that thing to grow the market so we can see what really can be done there? What's the right accessible price point? What's the right interface? What's all the right experience? Let's stop talking to the geeks. Let's go to the real masses where to really bring this technology to them, just like the iPod was for MP3s and digital music. To really break it open for people. And that was what got me excited, going, wait a second, there's some there.
Right. And I actually think it's important because I think if I was on the outside, like I would assume that Ledger went out and we knocked on your door and we were like, Tony, we really need your help. Right. You really gotta help us. That's why I think this story is like worth telling, because what actually happened is you personally said, I want to solve this problem.
Well, I first said, I'm not interested. I'm like, I'll help you because Ian, you're my friend. And I knew Pascal because we had met a few times at different events. And Ian, you're my friend. I want to help you. And so that was the due diligence. And then I was like, well, look at this. We went to dinner with Pascal. We went a few things. I was like, I think you guys need to do this. And I was like, okay. And then I started thinking about the parallels back to the early iPod days and Nest days, all these different things. I was like, And so it started getting me curious. But I still I got enough stuff to do. I'm really busy. I don't need to do this. That was a different life.
Well, and one of my favorite quotes from you is that when you have an idea, you run from it.
Yeah, I run from when I think it's either a bad or a good idea, I run because I have too many ideas because I've embraced them.
And too little time.
And too little time. So I got to run from them.
But this one chased you down.
It chased me down. I have a whole chapter in my book said great ideas chase you and build. And so this was like perfectly timed. Like this thing hunted me down. And it would... we didn't even have a formal relationship besides we're all friends. So I just started thinking about it, started with a white sheet of paper, and then started designing it all myself just on speculation. Like maybe there's some there, just like I did Nest and other things. I was like, okay, let me start looking at it.
So you went out and you bought all of the devices on the market.
I went out, spent my money, and said, I'm going to go try this thing. I'm going to see what it's really all about.
And what did you learn from like looking at everything that's out there?
I couldn't tell what anything was. There was nothing iconic. So first of all, you didn't know what any of them were. Were they USB sticks? Were they smartphones? There was nothing that's screamed, this is what this is. It all looked like something similar to something other thing. So people would get confused. So that was the first thing. Then I looked at them, they were all these black rectangles or squares or what. They were all these black shapes. And they were like, there's nothing here that like drew me in. I was like, oh, that's not so cool. I'm like, why would I do that? We got to have some iconic thing. When you saw the iPod, a lot of people are confused what the hell it was. But once it was burned in your memory, like for the next 18 generations, you knew what that thing was.
Yeah, I know. I could just draw the outline and a whole entire generation of people go iPod.
Yeah, exactly. It's, it's like when you see the Beetle, the car, the Beetle or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, oh, yeah, I know what that is, right? So what would be that iconic thing so that was one thing, but that wasn't going to lead to anywhere. That was just what's unique. What's going to be that unique look. Then after that was like, well, it's got to be usable. Like right now, these are all beeps and buttons and different weird interfaces. And I'm like, this is like Morse code. I'm like, no, that's not going to work. And people are used to smartphone interfaces and they love them. So how do we get that without making a smartphone? So it can't be as big as a smartphone. It's got to be bigger than a USB stick because you can't do much with a user interface. So what's in the middle? And I was like, oh, of course it's a credit card. Like that, like, can we get a keyboard to work on it? There was all kinds of other things, but everyone understands what a credit card is. And if you think of the future of, digital, right? Credit cards were the first ones to go digital to actually take money and say you could transfer it. Like, oh, well, maybe that's a great analogy. People know what that is. So is this like a next generation credit card? So like, let's try with that and let's try to make a user interface that would work in that size. And doing a bunch of mock-ups, it was like, yeah, I think this can work. That was another check. So here's credit card size, user interface that works. Could it be iconic as well?
Right. And so, dear listener, I would like to pause and say, now you know what was in Tony's head at the time. And then Tony called me and he said, Ian, I know what it is. And I was like, okay, what is it? And he said, I can't tell you.
I think I figured out the design, but I can't tell you yet because I got to make sure I can build it.
Exactly. So what was the part you were unsure about at that? Because is it safe to say like, you had a vision, you had something pictured in your head, you had a design, but you didn't even want to tell me about it yet because you had doubts.
I had doubts. Well, look, we were already starting from a really great platform, the Ledger hardware platform, the secure elements and the software. So it's like I already knew we had that we could build on top of. Then I was like, okay, the size, this. Then I was like, wait a second. It's got to be iconic. If you look at all these other devices, whether they were cell phones or smartphone sized or USB sized, they all had a screen on them, but the screens were dead. They were all black. And I was like, why are they all black? Well, I want something that I can see now, because it's not a device I'm gonna, I need to use like a smartphone. It's gonna be a very more specific purpose device. So I was like, what would I want? I want to be able to know what's on this device. And I was like, wait a second. I had been looking at trying to do something with e-ink displays. That's the same display that's on a Kindle, hundreds of millions of shipped of those things. I was like, I've always wanted to do a product. I try to look at doing a product with Nest, with e-ink displays. And I was like, this is the perfect opportunity. I can actually if I can get an e-ink display, and I know I could I get a special e-ink display that could always display whatever it is when it's off, that was robust enough that could have a touchscreen on top of it, and at a small size, and would allow us to have all the battery life of that people have been used to in the crypto world. Like, you charge it once and it lasts 6 months, maybe even a year. Like, how can we get that? So it's like, e-ink displays, yes. And then I was like, but wait a second. We can't just have an e-ink display. Anyone can have an e-ink display. Then it looks like a mini Kindle. That's not fun. So how do we think about the future of cash? So we were already doing the future of credit cards. What's the future of cash? And if you think of a stack of cash, it's a bunch of bills that are wrapped with a band around it. And the band, so when you look at it from the side, the long way, you can see the denomination, even if you can't see top down. It's like, oh, a band and wrapped. And then I thought about ledger, a ledger being a book, being, hey, where you write down all of your transactions, and it has a spine. A book has a spine. I was like, wait a second. Can we have this little wrap like on a bill and a spine from a ledger all together? And that's when it came to me that's like, let's wrap the screen all the way around the side. So we have this spine that can indicate value, can indicate what it is, as well as all kinds of other states of the device. And then on the top, have a personalization top that doesn't get affected. No notch like you see on smartphones. It's literally a perfect display where you could display artwork, NFTs, what have you, whenever you want. I was like, this is it. So when I told you I had the idea, I was like, I got the idea, I got the everything, but I had to make sure we could get the screen, and the screen would be that thing. So literally the first all plastic display that wraps around the side, if you could do that, and that's why I didn't want to tell you.
Yeah.
Is because I wanted to make sure we could get that display.
And I think that there's another thing that's so interesting here, and I hope you don't mind me saying, but this is my personal opinion. First of all, I think that from my experience, you're the only person I've ever seen kind of envision, the circuit board and the billboard simultaneously, right? And I think that that's incredible. Also, I come back to the story that you've told me about the first iPod, that device, and I never realized this, was a risk because there was a hard drive in it which had never been in market before. So
yeah, no, it was a new. It had never even shipped. Right, it never, not just in a music player, but never even shipped to anyone. It was this brand new. At that time was a 5 gigabyte mini hard drive.
And how big was the risk? Like, what do you think the risk that product was just going to fail in market because that hard drive didn't work?
Well, the hard drive was originally made so you could slip it into a laptop, right? So you could slip it into what was then known as a PCMCI or PC card slot. So it was designed for that. But what we were doing was we're taking that little hard drive and putting it inside a little handheld Deca card-sized device, and it could get dropped. You don't drop your laptop. Like, when you drop your laptop, you're like, oh shit, I dropped my laptop. It's probably dead. When you drop at that time, a Walkman or whatever else, it's like, oh, it's going to just keep working, a radio, whatever it is. Like, this thing had to keep working, and it had a hard drive in it. So this was a huge risk for the iPod itself. Was like, we can make all this other stuff work, but could it be robust enough? And that's the same way I thought about the screen, which was, okay, we're going to make this all new thing that the world's never seen before. Right, on the iPod, we had the first lithium-ion battery too. We had a few things, but really it was the hard drive that was the biggest if this goes wrong, it goes really wrong kind of situation.
And that's the part that I just wanted to focus on for the listener, because I find it really, really interesting. I think, it's one thing to just dream unbounded, right? Again, like we always say, ideas are cheap and execution is hard. It's another thing to look at everything that's out there on the market and go, okay, how do I make, a hardware wallet based on all the technology that exists in the market? And I think that, what is so cool about what you've done, and that's why I make the iPod example, because I think it's what you do, is you go, what's almost possible, right?
It has to be just the new, it has to be so new that no one else has it, so you can make it your own.
It's also available, by the way. Like there is someone that you can call. Now
there's always someone you can call. Just like I remember the multi-touch screen on the iPhone. There's always but it's never quite right yet.
Yeah, I think I've heard you say that the multi-touch screen on the iPod, the iPhone, the first time you saw it was the size of a table.
Yeah, it was the size of a ping pong table. Yeah,
amazing.
Like it was not shrunk down.
So it's quote unquote possible.
It's possible, but can we actually make millions of them and can do it in good quality? And that was the same thing with the hard drive. They didn't know. They didn't even think they had a market for it.
Well, and by the way, same thing here. When we're talking to the company about the screens, they've never made them in these kind of numbers, right? So
yeah, exactly, and not with these kinds of. We push the boundaries on every single piece of it, right?
On the specs, on the radius of on the curvature.
Yeah, the curvature on the side. But look. Let's be truthful. You guys all looked at me. Everybody did. Pascal, you, Charles, the whole Ledger team.
I didn't know enough to really be skeptical.
Well, okay. You were just like, yeah, if Tony says.
If Tony says, I say yes.
But trust me, I was the new guy on the block. Even with whatever I had done in the past, everyone's like, this guy's going to lead us down a rabbit hole that's like we're never going to get out of. Like, we're going to tank the company based on this guy. Are you sure? This Tony guy's crazy, is what I heard. So I had to do a lot of, making sure it was right. And that's why I didn't want to tell you.
Well,
and I had, before I presented it as the solution, and then, everybody's skeptical, and that's fine. They should be. But, with everybody's leadership, your leadership, Pascal's leadership, and showing how it could work and showing that it's real, like we were able to commit to that. It's not been easy, but it's that thing that makes it it so important.
Well, there's
so
a couple
iconic.
There's two other things here I want to capture for posterity, because I feel in some ways like I'm doing my own oral history that, that like, so my if I tell my kids these stories, you'll be able to
I'll back you up,
corroborate them for me. But again, to the point on not wanting to, jump the gun too much, we were out with the kids one day and you're like, okay, do you want to know what it is? I'm like, yes, I do. And what you described to me a device which is credit card sized, has an e-ink display, and the e-ink wraps all the way around the edge, and so that you get that feeling of what you said to me was, what does the future fat stack of cash look like? And to get that, you stack them up. And they magnet together, right? But what you said to me that day is you said, okay, but you can't tell Pascal yet. Right, because you were still, doing the diligence on
making
the
sure we
screen
could
itself.
price it out right. We can make money with it.
And I have to say, like, one of the things I love most about this project is, we did everything that you said. We talked about it. We cast doubts on it. We validated it. We pushed it forward. We also then got together with our friends at Layer, Benjamin and the team.
That's right.
And we looked at a number of different, kind of versions, and some of them looked very different. They were longer or taller. The screen wrapped around the top instead of the side. And
some cases the screen didn't wrap too.
Exactly. We took a very serious look at alternatives, right? So I think that's actually something too to highlight for people who are thinking about this. You didn't have one idea in your head and then say, my idea is for sure correct and it cannot be challenged. We went on a multi-month exercise of challenging the idea.
Right.
Technically,
right.
Design-wise. Now, what I love is that we ended up in the original design.
Yeah, and we were trying to rule in other things, rule out stuff that was in the design, like when we went through it, and it still came out the way first envisioned, which is amazing, and it's great because that showed us we were on the right track, and it got, all those skeptics, they all got on track, the same track as I did, because they worked through their brain, saw the details and said, oh yeah, we can commit. because Ledger, Ledger's not a Google. Ledger's not a huge company. It's a big company in the crypto space, the biggest in the hardware wallet space. But we have to, every step has to be well considered and has to be done right.
Yeah, and I feel like that's also in the category of running from the idea, right? Yes, I love the idea. Yes, we love the idea, but let's challenge the idea.
Exactly.
There is something really beautiful, and I wonder how much of that is sort of bias, right? For me, I was definitely biased. Every time I looked at the designs, I was like, I still love the original one, but anyway, I love that bit of it. I think also, just going through the whole process, there was more because there was a cultural thing that was happening at the same time, and I think Ledger has an absolutely uncompromising security culture. There are many times in the past 7 years of this company when we could have played to the thing of the day, right? I mean, the amount of times since I've come to this company that people inside the company have tried to get us to compromise on security or self-custody.
I even tried. I was like, and then you guys would convince me, no, this is the way it has to be. And I was like, okay, that's the way it has to be.
For one reason or another, it's very easy to compromise on security or self-custody. And this company for 7 years has had this rudder saying that's where we don't compromise, right? And then you bring in, and you didn't come alone. Right. We immediately, brought in people who...
We brought in amazing people like David Tubman, the first guy and one of the first people on the iPod team. We brought people from iPhone team, from Nest. We brought even user interface designers from General Magic and people I've worked with for years. So, much to your credit and to Pascal's credit, you didn't just allow me to do the design. You also allowed me to design the team and say, these are the people we need, right, to actually pull this off. And we're able to bring the best of the best, the dream team together with a dream team of security to make this happen, which is like astounding.
Yeah. And I think that's the part, like watching that, I personally, I always lived in LA and worked in San Francisco, and I felt like this human bridge between these two cultures, this sort of media culture and then this tech culture, these two cultures that needed to know each other. And then I moved here and I'm this human bridge between, I was, whether it was a fashion luxury culture and the Silicon Valley culture. Now these are two different cultures, right? Like the culture of ease of use is very different from the culture of security.
Yeah.
And we have two people or two sets of people that are uncompromising on both sides. Like this must be simple for the consumer and this must be secure by design, as you said. And putting those two things together, honestly, for me, it feels like a bit of magic.
It was putting those things together to get those cultures to work because they're very different cultures. But then there's also putting it on this device that also was very risky, right? Like all these risks. So we're putting risk and cultures and blending it all. And it seemed like it was, like, oh my God, in the first months, it was like, who's these guys? And why is this showing up? And why don't they do it this way? And like, there was a lot of creative tension. But thanks to your leadership, Ian, and thanks to Pascal's leadership, we were able to bring this stuff together and a lot of discussions with all these teams to really get people to understand what we're trying to do. And we were still uncompromising on the user experience, but we found ways to work together with the uncompromising security experience to make them so they could sing as best as possible and understand every single reason why we asked the user to do certain things was really justified and wasn't just skipped over or wasn't, it wasn't extraneous. Like we were still able to remove some things and we were also able to, streamline to make it the best experience without compromising security, which was really, really nice to see. But it took a lot of work together to say, we're going to think about things differently from both sides.
So after all this, the device must be perfect, right? We're done?
Yeah, right. Device is done. Sure. Hardly.
I think, and one of the perspectives that you've brought to the team, which has been most helpful is, guys, there's a V1. There was a V1 iPod or Gen 1 iPod and
Gen 2, 18 different generations. And, the other thing was...
How do you think about that? Because if you're uncompromising on the experience, but you're not going to get everything in and there are certain things that aren't going to be visible until future generations of the hardware. How do you kind of manage that expectation?
Well, you have to, great artists ship. That's what Steve Jobs would always say is great artists must ship. So, and I learned that from him, but I also learned at General Magic. There's a great documentary people should watch out there, about one of the biggest failures in existence.
GeneralMagicTheMovie.com.
Yes, exactly. And we were trying to make version 10 before shipping version 1.
At General Magic.
At General Magic. And so what we learned was, and what I learned the hard way was, make sure you get that V1 out to get the best way you possibly can to get feedback. And that was the same thing with the iPod. V1 was getting it out there, and we had lots of stuff to do with V2 and V3. And so another thing I said to you guys was, look, guys, if we're going to do this Stax thing, it's not just V1. We're going to have to keep iterating it as always. And you said, absolutely. So there's one which is iterating the hardware, and that's just normal. Everyone understands that. But then there's the other one, which is iterating the software and the services on top of that. And that can happen more quickly. And so it's really nice to be able to know that we all work together and we're making roadmaps of where this thing goes, because just like we see where the original iPod or the iPhone was, or Nest for that matter, and how it's continued to grow into people's lives. And we actually put more hardware in this version of the product than necessary, because we know of all the cool stuff we want to do with the software and services over time. Just like when you upgrade your phone with new operating systems, it has new capabilities. We think we're going to have the same thing here.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that I want to make sure that people who are listening understand, is because it probably feels like we're making a lot of noise about this product right now. But I think for you and I, we think about it as the V1 iPod. And the V1 iPod there was no iTunes for Windows at that time. And by the way, Windows was 98% of the world at that moment. People forget. There was no iTunes store, right? So
and no iTunes store with music or videos or anything else.
Exactly. No video, no podcasts.
You had to rip everything with the CD. You had to put the physical CD in and copy it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of who it was that told me that it was like Jaws who came to their office with a stack of CDs to help them like rip them and get them in one day.
Exactly.
Which is just incredible. But I think that's the right way to think about it. But let me ask you. I mean, people throw around iPod analogies all the time. Do you think that this is an apt analogy in the case of Ledger Stax?
I think it is. Well, if I look at from kind of the way the market is developing. Right? It's still early days in the grand scheme. We have millions of users and everything else, but it's still early days in this world of digital assets. But you needed something to really thrust it into the next next level of growth. And so this, I believe, is that. It's going to be it's accessible. It's attractive. It's not just rational. There's an emotional reason for owning it as well as a rational reason for owning it. And we just saw all the stuff that's happened in the crypto world. If you don't hold your crypto yourself, it's not yours, right? And so there's enough users out there who know that they need a device like this because they have been burned or heard about people who are burned. And there's a lot of people who want to have something, and they want to get in this world and feel secure that they're doing it the right way. I think we've just shown that, and I think we're at that right moment. Who would have known the blow up that we just experienced? But wow, it couldn't be more perfectly timed, because we started this 18 months ago. It's not like we had a crystal ball, but it all just fell in our lap. And it reminds me of MP3s all over again, which was, the RIAA, the Recording Industry Artists Association, was suing Napster. They were all suing after retailers, everybody, anywhere in the digital music space. People were saying regulate, all that stuff.
Yeah, no,
it was a disaster in digital music in 2001 when the iPod
congressional
first showed.
hearings about P2P at the same time that you were launching the iPod. So there's that analogy.
Oh yeah, it wasn't a fait accompli that the iPod was to be a success.
No, and it's not like the music business was embracing digital music.
They wanted nothing to do with it.
Right. So I think that's such an interesting analogy that most people have probably forgotten at this point. They're like, oh wow, yeah, I remember. Yeah, that does sound familiar now. But it's not like the iPod launched into like a world where everyone was like, digital music is the future.
Oh no, nobody was saying that at all, right? And
by the way, people didn't even think Apple was the future when you launched the iPod.
I didn't even know if I was joining Apple, because Michael Dell was saying, let's pack up the company and give it back to the shareholders and just sell it off in parts. So think about what's changed in those 20 years
exactly.
from then to now. So think about, we don't even remember that in 2000, the internet imploded. Like all the companies on the internet imploded and said, no more e-tailing. None of this stuff's going to happen. And then the best years were the next one. So I'm looking at this the same way. I saw that digital music was in turmoil. The internet was in turmoil in 2000, 2001. Yes, the crypto and digital assets is in turmoil right now, but the technology will exist. It does exist. It exists for a reason. And we're just learning the right way to do it. We tried version 1. Now we're going to do it the right way. And people understand self-custody is it. And we're going to have the right devices and experiences to allow people to confidently get involved and try it out and see what they think. So to me, this is a breath of fresh air to more or less press the reset button on how people think about the technology. Not about the culture. Let's put the culture aside, but the technology and its benefits. And so 2000, 2001, all over again. I love that we're in this turmoil because there's so many parallels. I'm like, and I think we have something that really can, can drive a lot of people to think differently about what the future of digital assets is.
Yeah, and I completely agree in doing it right. And I think you and I can kind of look objectively at Ledger as relative newcomers here and say the fact that these guys have been saying security and self-custody for the past 7 years, makes them look incredibly prescient at this moment in crypto history. It's funny because for me personally, I actually thought Ledger Stax was perfectly timed because I was looking at what companies like Instagram and Facebook and Nike were doing in the space and going, oh, like you said, a piece that has, connection to culture, connection to emotion, like this is going to be, a real driver of adoption for people. People might not be coming in just because they're, speculating on crypto assets.
Oh, well, I love your term, Internet of Value, right? It's not just Internet of Information, which we've been going through, but the Internet of Value is really true, and it feels right.
And so, the fact that this turmoil, as you said, has opened people's eyes to the importance of self-custody. And as you said, putting something into the space that does it right. And to me, that, that sort of like not your keys, not your coins is like when on the iPod it said, don't steal music.
Don't steal music. Exactly.
Do it right.
Do it right.
But
I think we're all wiser now. I think we're all a lot wiser. But I just remember those early days when and I didn't tell you this, but this is something behind. But when you guys were talking to me with Pascal and Yui, and we were having those dinners and those lunches and talking about what the future of Ledger and the products could be, I was always like, yeah, you'll just use a central exchange. I was always saying that to you, but I was also like, yeah, central exchange. Yeah, what the hell? We already have Coinbase. We already have these other things. Why does anyone need anything else? And so as I got to learn more and more through the work of the Dungeon, the work of Charles G and and all of the security, I was like, oh, self-custody does matter. Most people don't understand this yet. We see lots of hacks, but it's really not about self-custody yet.
Yeah.
In terms of like in top of mind. And it's like, it couldn't have been like dropped in our lap. Like, oh, okay. But you really had to understand the technology and understand the difference between these kind of third-party custodials versus versus the self-custody. It's a very, very different thing. And the reason why crypto was created in the first place.
Exactly. If not self-custody, why crypto? And the thing that got me to, to kind of really understand it was, again, I was at AOL in 1999. I was at Nullsoft, which made Winamp. Nullsoft was purchased by AOL, and I was there when AOL said, the future of AOL is AOL.com, right? So when Brian Armstrong said, the future is self-custody, I felt like I'd seen that, AOL saying the future is AOL.com, moment, but it's true that, 2 years ago when I started at this company and I was, preaching self-custody, it was sort of like I was trying to convert people to veganism, and they were,
why do I need to do that?
They
like everything's fine.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's healthier, but man, have a hot dog. Come on, lighten up, but I don't have to have that conversation anymore, thankfully. But I also think that that's where a product like Ledger Stax is important because it's like, it's sort of like, it's why iTunes was important, right? And the iTunes store was important because it's one thing to say to people, don't steal music. But they're looking at you going, but
this other thing's easier. I want this. I want this convenience. I want all of these other features and functions that that come with it.
Give me what I want in a form that I want it.
Don't tell me no.
Exactly. And so I feel like that's where this is important as well, because we're putting it in people's lives in that way.
Well, I'm terribly excited. Like I said, I didn't want to do this, but then I was totally convinced. I convinced myself, and now now because of all the things are falling in place, and everything you guys told me at the beginning is actually coming true. Plus, I convinced myself. I'm like, this is a really interesting moment, very, very interesting moment. So and we've been working with the teams around the world, and they are so jazzed. And when we started showing people the device for real, just over the last week, 2 weeks, people who are in the know, I can't believe the reaction. So, there's been a few people like, yeah, whatever. But I remember at Nest, at iPod, even iPhone, there are those people, yeah, it doesn't matter. And then there's the people who really knew and got it. And so if you have that kind of polarity where people are laughing at you and other people are like, no, this is serious, like this is important, it's usually a good indication of what might be to come. And so, it's always nerve-wracking when you do something new, a V1 that's totally different than anything's there, and you're like, is this going to be accepted? And because we always talk every day, and we convince ourselves. But when we finally got to show people over the last couple of weeks who've never seen it, and they kind of got it in terms of like, well, there's the FTX thing, but they also understood what the device meant and where it can go, and they got terribly excited. That was like, okay, I can breathe a little easier. Let's just ship now. Like, let's get this thing out and let's see what people can do with it, because we're just getting started. I can't imagine what V3 and V5 and 7 and 12 are going to look like. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that. But I really want to see those reactions that people have on when they have the devices later on in their hands. I'm so excited because I remember what those feelings like. And I can see it on your face. You're smiling.
That's the fun part.
Just see what people think when they put their hands.
I mean,
on
ultimately, we work for them, right? We work for the
course.
users. So we're going to put it in their hands. They're going to tell us what they think, and then we go back and build for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't wait to get the feedback and see what people think, and we can all go work on whatever the future is after that. So.
Man, well, I'm really happy that we got this on tape, virtual tape. But I'm going to start I'm going to finish the way I started, which is just thank you. It's super fun to do this with you, man.
Dude, like how it's a dream come true, and just all of it, but especially working with you, working with Pascal, working with the team, doing it in Paris, doing it outside of Silicon Valley, and showing the world with all kinds of talent from around the world. Like, you can go and build stuff that's amazing, and it doesn't all have to be in Silicon Valley, and you can have like world-class stuff, and you don't have to always come from a big company, and do something that's going to be really important and fundamental. So this is just, it's a dream come true. I pinch myself. So it's so wonderful. So thank you for the opportunity, Pascal, and the whole Ledger team for working with the crazies, me, the crazy, as well as the other crazies I brought in. And we'll see what happens. I'm terribly excited.
Super fun. Thanks. Oh, and then just to bring it all the way back around to the person that introduced us to begin with, what are we doing tonight?
Oh, Bradley. Yeah, Bradley. Hey, Bradley, thank you so much. We're going to go see Robert Smith and The Cure, your favorite band. We love these guys. We can't wait to see them here tonight in Paris. So,
perfect.
All together.
Bookends.
All right. Thanks, Bradley.
This content is provided for informational purposes only and is the sole expression of our opinion and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Do your own research. Any loss or profit is your sole responsibility. Stay safe.